Well, I've been doing research for this video, reading and learning about the history and development of OSB. And to be honest, I was expecting some controversy. I was expecting to hear differing opinions on whether or not it was as good as plywood or whether using OSB is a cheap shortcut or whatever. But there is no controversy. It's a myth. And I don't know if it was just me who picked up on this myth, but I feel like my whole life, when I look at OSB, I always just kind of think that's an imitation knockoff plywood. Maybe just because it's kind of ugly. That's like the one non-negotiable truth. It does not look nice compared to plywood. But long story short, for decades now, not only is it just as good technically, but in a lot of ways, it's better. In the early years, OSB always had this big asterisk kind of next to it. Like, yeah, it works, but don't get it wet. It'll be ruined and that sort of a thing. In fact, here's an article from JLC saying that exact same thing. And here's another one. I want to give kind of a current update on this OSB technology. And I'm going to be looking at this particular product, the one you're watching go down here, to do that, which is Weyerhaeuser Gold. I think it's one of the oldest OSB products out there. It's been around a really long time. And I'm not going to try and explain all the technical details or give you a sales pitch on it or anything. I just want to relay some of the things I learned that I thought were cool or interesting while I was reading through their material. I think I read pretty much all of their resource sheets and technical bulletins and their marketing material. And I watched a lot of their YouTube content also. So I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what Weyerhaeuser wants us to know about their OSB product. The first thing, and this really surprised me, is that Weyerhaeuser claims that OSB is actually the market leader in subflooring, with a market share as high as 75%. That is massive. And in my mind, it totally flips the script. Apparently, plywood is actually the underdog. Well, here's a piece of the flooring material. These chunks are called strands. That's the technical term. And they put the larger strands on the outside and smaller strands on the inside. And here's the part that I found really interesting. To get a piece of OSB this size, this is about an inch, they start with 8 inches of mat. In other words, they stack up 8 inches of these strands and then compress them with heat and glue and resin down to 1 inch of finished material. So that's pretty neat. And this is kind of a spoiler, but this piece has been laying in the mud like this. This is one of the cutoff ends for several months. And I'm just kind of admiring how good it looks. I ripped it up a little bit with the hammer to show it, but as you can see, it looks great. So, pretty cool. The chemical that holds all these strands together, I'll call it a glue, is a huge part of how it works. They claim that it penetrates clear down to the cell wall and lumen, which apparently is deeper than the chemical traditionally used to hold plywood laminations together. I really don't know about that, but it would be fun to see some lab testing on that claim. What I do know is that this product has a 200-day no swelling warranty. In other words, they know it's going to get wet during construction, and they are not worried about it. So let's talk about this heart of the matter, so to speak, which is OSB getting wet. The first thing is that water's not good for any lumber or wood product, period. It's just not in its nature. When it gets wet, it gets weaker, it can mold and rot, and insects are more likely to come in and chew it up since it's softer. So don't expect waterproof as one of the criteria of any wood product at all. Pouring rain out here, and these guys are doing layout today, which
probably the worst part of framing to do in the rain. I don't know.
Even though this OSB can handle water and has that huge warranty, Weyerhaeuser is still very aware that water is not good for it, and they have a lot to say about it. The biggest takeaway I got from reading their bulletin was around storing and installing OSB that's already wet. And that's because when it's wet, it's not as stiff and it can warp. The technical term for this is deflection. So for storage, number one, keep it covered. And then number two, you want to store it flat, not up on its edge. And secondly, if you are installing a sheet that's wet or soaking wet, brace it up before you fasten it. Otherwise, you might fasten it in a way that keeps it in a warped position. My favorite technical bulletin is their TB 104. It's titled Information About Floor Performance. And there's so many things about this document that I found kind of hilarious. I felt like I uncovered this rabbit hole of science and research about this somewhat fuzzy concept of how comfortable a floor is to live on. Weyerhaeuser has been taking this very seriously. In 1991, after several decades of complaints of bouncy floors, they formed a formal committee to study and create a rating system to account for all the factors that can affect the bounciness or dynamic response of a floor system. The reason it was sort of funny to me is because it's such a personal and subjective thing about how annoying a bouncy floor even is. And they talk about this in the research. In fact, I got to read this one line that really illustrates it. Even the history and economic status of the observer were found to be important. For example, someone moving from a small slab-on-grade floor system to their first framed floor, or a buyer spending large amounts of money on a home, might be more sensitive to floor performance. I put myself in this category of someone who is sensitive to floor performance. I've got small kids, and we live in an old house with what would be a very low performance floor. I am not kidding. When my kids run across the house or start jumping around, the lights are shaking, windows are rattling, the bookshelves are banging against the walls. It is intense. And I'm usually in the other room doing like deep breathing exercises because it's so annoying to me. So needless to say, I really appreciate that this research has been done. And as you can imagine, it's super complicated. You've got not just the stiffness of the sheets, but you also have floor joist spacing and spans, supports under the joist, transverse partitions, blocking, strapping and strong backs, all sorts of variables. And Weyerhaeuser has done noble work for the whole industry by researching this and then sharing their findings. I should have specified earlier that I'm really only talking about OSB and plywood in the sense of floor and wall and roof sheeting. I have no doubt that in other applications, it's a completely different conversation. And I should mention that there's a lot of new OSB products like Zip, and especially the Zip insulated sheeting, that are sort of making the OSB versus plywood debate itself obsolete.
How massive that bathroom looks in the plans.
I know.
Remember how you're like, we just don't want this huge long bathroom. Now it's like,
I know.
okay, well, don't worry.
It's like, where am I gonna put my toothbrush?
Yeah. Looks so long in the plans.
Last topic to cover here. As soon as the floor deck was on, Allie and I were shocked and concerned at how small the house felt. I don't know why, but it just felt tiny, and we were actually pretty worried. And then when the walls and partitions started going up, it started making sense and it feeling more like what we were expecting. And I mentioned this to Jesse, and he said it's really how it goes throughout the whole process. The house kind of goes back and forth between feeling really small and then at other times really, really big, depending on what step it's at. Well, Mike and Jesse and their guys are doing a fantastic job framing this house. You may not be able to tell from the video, but it is not a simple job. The house has a lot going on. There's posts and beams and shear walls and strapping and big hangers and just pretty much everything possible. I have friends and family who are asking me things like, oh, hey, you're building the house. How's that going? And I always make sure they know that Allie and I are not building it. The contractor is. Someday I would love to build a house, but I don't want to steal their credit. The house looks so good. They're doing such nice work that somehow saying that I'm building the house just feels like stealing big time. I know it looks kind of easy in the video, but that's number one, because it's a video, and number two, because professionals always make things look easy, but it is not. I do have a friend in my neighborhood here who built a house for himself and his family, and he actually built it himself, nights and weekends, with his wife and kids there helping as well. I think it's one of the most impressive things I've seen. It took several years, but he did all of it. If I think back, it might be just like the drywall, tape, and texture, and maybe a HVAC contractor were the only other people I saw there. So he truly built that house, and someday I would love to do it. Kudos to all of you who do this or have done it. And if you're wanting to build a house or contract a house like what I'm doing, best of luck to you. Thanks to everyone for watching Essential Craftsman. Keep up the good work.